Welcome to Clothing Culture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward
And discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Culture is brought to you by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience.
Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Culture. Today, we are talking influencer marketing. Well, actually, it's more of an evolution from influencer marketing to influencers actually building a brand. Bret, are you excited for this conversation?
Yeah, it's kind of a wild thing. I've been around a few years, and, I remember when I was younger that the influencers of that time were, music stars, rock and roll stars, TV stars, and they definitely had an impact, and people would follow these fashion items. With the evolution of communication and Instagram, Pinterest, the list is long, right? Mm-hmm. TikTok, the latest, greatest. It's wild how our influencers have changed. It seems like the current generations are really looking for a little bit more authenticity, probably a little bit more curation, and there's a good group of influencers that really, in our business at least, I feel have a really good handle on their perspective and their DNA, and they grow a really loyal group of followers, and it's really exciting to see how that is growing so rapidly in our industry. I think they're predicting like the influencer market in general, all components are expected to be somewhere over $10 billion this year. Mm-hmm. Today, when you look at influencers, they have these unique perspectives and these unique little niches. And so you find that it's, there's a lot more diversity, in influencer marketing. And I think the key is to understand those little niches and diversity and understand the power behind each one of those. And I think if you as a lot of influencer income is driven by pairing that DNA or that niche to a particular brand that resonates together.
Yeah,
and
making sure there's a really good fit there.
Yes.
And when that fit does exist, that's where you're getting that great ROI, that 5 or 6% for every dollar, or $5 or $6
for every dollar.
Yeah, which is absolutely extraordinary. So
it's almost as good as cryptocurrency on the upswing.
Right. So understanding that great return on investment and the fact that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, it is no surprise that influencers are thinking, you know what, I kind of want a bigger piece of that pie.
Right.
No longer do I just want to get paid to do a post, but maybe it's time for me to become my own brand. Yeah,
and we're seeing that on the mega influencers, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, a lot of people not close to the influencer market, they think that this is not a super intentional business. These people have gotten lucky. They don't really work very hard, and that's not true. When you really dive into this influencer market, from the Kardashian mega influencer kind of market all the way down, there is a lot of intent. There's a lot of curation, and a ton of talent in building these followings. And the larger ones certainly have started to move heavily into their own brands and done quite well with that. But we're finding that there's definitely space and room. We talked about in previous episodes about the rise of the boutique brands. Mm-hmm. We're finding that that's also driven by these influencers. They have this point of view, they have this unique niche, and that can expand itself into a brand.
Yeah, I think that is a key starting place. Do they have a really well thought out vision or point of view that could help be that kind of foundational ground for building their brand? I think that is absolutely a really smart starting place, as well as, really taking a look at the numbers side of things. Do they have a track record of, proven sales? What are those metrics really like? Do they have a highly engaged audience? Are they, how vetted are they at really taking a look and saying, could this be a sustainable business if I got the infrastructure in place? And, really looking at influencers who are contemplating, am I ready to go from representing a brand to actually building a brand, in addition to understanding those metrics and your unique viewpoint, I think a core question would be, are you really ready to make this a business? Because building an apparel line, it is a business, just as their influencer business is.
Yeah. And I think, that's probably some of the hesitation, if you will, or the longer term thought process that these influencers go through. They really understand how to curate themselves as a brand, their vision, their aesthetic as a brand. And then, you walk into some uncharted territory. It's one thing to choose, let's say we're talking about fashion influencers, if you will. And so, it's one thing to be able to curate wonderful product that's already been built, right? Pulling in brands and talking about trends in the industry, which they're so good at within each one of their genres. It's a completely other thing to be able to build and launch a brand. There's a ton of risks for them associated with that, because a partner in that, a good partner, is critical, because they've established, if you will, this brand identity, brand equity, stewardship of their brand at a particular level. And if you don't have that right partner, or product is launched that's substandard, or there's a lot of complaints, or it misses the mark in some way, that can really affect the overall influencer's reputation online. And so, I think that today, that's probably one of the larger gaps they have to leap. They have to leap to really understand that. And they have to do a lot of soul searching and due diligence to make sure that if they're going to do that, outside of all the other steps you have to do a brand, but make sure that there's a specifically good partner that's not going to make them look bad, right?
Right. Well, let's face it, anytime you are getting ready to start a business, one of the things that we always talk about is really making sure that you've got that business plan in place and really understanding how you want to go about running your business. There's some really unique opportunities that exist out there for influencers right now. There's the typical, I'm a business startup option where you make sure you got your finances together, you build the operations all on your own, you get that infrastructure in place to, design and manufacture, source, warehouse, to handle all the marketing, and you get all those pieces in place, which takes a lot of building expertise and
a
time
hell of a lot
to
of investment.
Absolutely.
Honestly, yeah.
But there are also options out there that, kind of provide that back end infrastructure and expertise for influencers, so they can kind of be the creator, provide their vision, and then lean on partners for that expertise. And I think that can be a really smart model when it comes to reducing some of those risks that you were just mentioning.
Sure.
We've certainly had some conversations recently with some influencers that had the idea of taking that next leap into building a brand for themselves, and have gone down the path to find later on that the product wasn't very well made, or the product wasn't
Canceling
delivered.
the contracts because it was an issue, right?
Exactly. Or finding out that the product was made in an area that could actually be damaging to their reputation, because it's, being made at a taboo part of the world, you know. So let's talk a little bit about some of those risks, and we're talking, product quality and some of those things. What are some other risks that you would say, if you're considering this, be mindful of?
Yeah, I think, the mindfulness of it is, what we had talked about before, the if you're going to do it on your own, there's a lot of things that have to be put in place. There's large investments that you've got to be looking at with respect to launching a brand. It's not something that you can really take lightly, and the world's a big place. So I think, for them, it's making sure that they've got a good understanding that, a typical brand. Influencers have had, we've seen on the news these positive things that have occurred with some key influencers where, hey, we've launched a collection, we sold out in 4 weeks or 3 weeks or almost instantaneously. But the realization is that may not happen for every influencer and not on every product. So, putting a mindset in place that if you're going to launch your own brand, just like we tell others that are in the beginning stages, the startups for boutique brands, is it could take some time. You might have it be an overnight success, but if you sort of plan, these developing years that are 3 years, and you've got that initial investment in place, you've got this ability to overcome some of the obstacles about growing that brand, overcoming the noise. I think influencers have a little bit of a leg up because if their audience is extremely loyal, you're not really marketing to the masses trying to get through the noise. You have your focused audience. The second part is really dealing with a partner that understands fabrication, quality, manufacturing. The majority of the creators or the influencers that we've met with, they understand aesthetic. They understand quality when it comes down to yarn counts, constructions, what makes yarn good or bad. Their history typically isn't in textile design.
Right.
So making sure that you've got a good partner that's not going to, fleece them, no play on words, in the long run, that's going to impact that, that brand equity. I think, having good quality control follow-throughs, great partners in terms of specifications. We talk about this regardless of whether it's an influencer launch or a startup launch or an existing business. Today, the majority of the business is happening online. And so there has to be a very intentional look at size, specification, and transparency. Returns can eat your lunch. And
20% is very typical in the industry.
Yeah. And so, when you're launching your own brand, it's really important to make sure that one, you've got garment specifications that are going to cater to your audience well, and two, that you relay that information properly. That requires some expertise in terms of technical design. And so, I think that those are, a small group of things that you've got to consider as you go through, third-party fulfillment, website development and design.
Each of these areas have very specific things that you don't know unless you know, right? And so, things like fulfillment, for example, understanding, do they ship internationally? How do they handle returns? What are those costs when that happens? When somebody manages a return. All of these things are items that need to be thought about in the very early stages of the development. And if it's something that, as an influencer, you're like, ooh, I don't know how much detail I want to get in.
Right.
I believe I've got a great idea and I've got a great audience, then that might be a scenario where finding that right partner that knows how to navigate that. So maybe pretend, Bret, that you're an influencer now.
Okay.
You're a podcaster.
No, right.
So,
me and my 4 followers. Yeah.
What are some things that you would do to vet out whether or not this could be a good partner to help you launch this brand?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, but a tough one to answer, because if I'm putting myself in the space of an influencer, I'm removing all this technical history that I have. So, asking the right questions can be more difficult because you don't know what questions to ask, basically. Right. But if you're looking at it from a startup point of view, where your experience isn't in the whole spectrum of a fashion brand or an apparel manufacturing kind of side, good questions to ask are, have you done other influencers' brands successfully? The influencer market's very, very tight, in general. So, you can go to another influencer and see how their experience was. Ratings are a part of our world today, 1 to 5-star ratings. So if they launched a brand for another influencer and that brand had 5-star ratings and had little to no quality returns, the other influencer is going to say, yeah, I had a good experience. This is a good thing. So, vetting the experience with other influencers in that community could be important.
Yeah, I would say research is absolutely going to be essential in this,
I think defining exactly the niche and level of product that you're looking to do. One of the big challenges when you're dealing with a startup, influencer or regular startup, is, your first launch, the quantities are generally pretty small. For an average consumer or somebody outside the business, you're looking at, when you look at things like 500 units per style color, you're like, wow, that's a lot of units. In the manufacturing world, that's sometimes
minimum, right?
a half to a quarter of the minimums that most factories will run. So there's a lot of challenges running sub-minimum quantities or smaller quantities. Certainly from a expense level, you're being charged more. But as you grow up, certainly
right, you'll be in better
proof of
position.
concept happens, you're you're in better position, profitability could go up. But understanding, that there are a lot of challenges and asking questions down the road of, what is my profitability going to look like? What is my product going to look like where I need to be from an MSRP level, a retail level, and back it through the chain, because there's so many levels of expense in an online business that I'm not really sure everyone understands when you kind of distill down to sort of a net profit level.
Again, I think it really does come down to a little bit of research. Also, so you can have really realistic expectations about, what you just spoke of. What is a minimum quantity run, and what does that look like, and what will my price points be, and what is the reality of sustainability? Can I have a sustainable garment for $100 if I'm producing 100 of them? These kinds of things. It's everyone's goal, right? To do better by the earth and make an accessible, luxurious, wonderful product for a reasonable price. But really doing the research to vet out, is that possible?
Right. And sometimes it is. Sometimes on small quantities, it's extremely difficult and extremely expensive. But you can certainly, sustainability is a big conversation. It's about stasis with people, planet, profit, right? All those different avenues. So part of that is really, the social compliance level. And I think it's still a challenge there with small quantities, but you can look to factories or producers that have a stable of factories that have all certified factories for social compliance. So that's part of that whole thing. Are we sustainably taking care of our employees, And then selectively looking through the wide variety of sustainable fabrics, if that's the choice that you're making. I think that sustainable synthetics, recycled polyesters, bio alternatives, things like that can carry very, very large minimums on yardages and can be quite expensive. But you can look at preferred natural fibers, preferred cottons, wools, linens, things like that are farmed a certain way. While there is an increase in cost, there's probably more availability and lesser minimums.
Right.
And so, having a partner to walk through all of those conversations, depending on what your DNA looks like, and what your key goals look like, is important in that space.
Understanding what are the choices you can make.
Yeah, right.
Because there's all kinds of them.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, before we kind of part ways, I'm having a thought that perhaps it might be a nice detail for us to share a document for those who are considering developing a brand in this space. What are some of those questions you can ask of potential partners to help vet out whether or not your values are aligned and you can be a good fit. So I'll put that out there, that we will make sure to have that available. But do you have any other words of wisdoms for influencers who are kind of on the cusp of, I'm not sure if if I'm ready to launch my own apparel line? Any other thoughts?
I would say realize it's an undertaking. Make sure that you have good factory partners or partners to carry you through the whole process, frankly.
Right.
The manufacturing is just part of that. The final thing that, at least for Stars and our partnership with a company that we've acquired with partners out of New York, Inspire, for the influencer that's at that right level with the good engagement that's looking to do that, there are options out there like Inspire that can in some cases greatly reduce the risk of launch. And we've got full support services, great experience on the backside. Those options might be something to explore. We're not the only one. We certainly believe that we're doing it right, but there are these kind of partnerships that are picking up on some of that risk, which may be a good first step or ultimate long-term partner, as you walk down this next step in in creating your own brand.
Those are great thoughts. Well, thanks, Bret, for joining me in this conversation once again today. And everyone out there, make sure to subscribe and stay apprised of upcoming episodes of Clothing Culture.